Have you ever wondered what happens when a highly paid NBA star starts playing like a background character instead of a main attraction?
And then you watching everybody around you enjoy vacation and enjoying off time. And you like, I still gotta, I gotta go hard for this game.
That's exactly the conversation swirling around Paul George right now. Despite locking in a 4-year, $212 million max contract with the Philadelphia 76ers, the former All-Star looks more like a spare part than a prized addition. While fans across the league hoped his arrival would mark a new era of dominance in Philadelphia, something bizarre has been unfolding instead. The 76ers remain stuck near the bottom of the Eastern Conference, and Paul George's output has been underwhelming, to say the least. But if you think that's the entire story, buckle up, because what's happening behind the scenes might be even more puzzling than his on-court numbers. It's hard to ignore the fact that at 34, Paul George's best years might be fading into the rearview mirror. While that's no grand revelation, aging hits everyone in the league. What's shocking is just how quickly and dramatically his game appears to have slipped. He's scoring in the mid-teens, occasionally sneaking above 20, but often struggling to get anywhere near the efficiency he once boasted. Sometimes he grabs a handful of rebounds or dishes out a few assists, but it's rarely enough to tip a game in Philadelphia's favor. The heart of the issue isn't just the raw numbers, it's the sense that he's become disengaged. And nothing underscores that perception more than his public comments, especially remarks about being bored playing at the 5 spot, something that left fans and pundits scratching their heads. Let's talk about that moment for a second. Picture this. The Sixers suffer a demoralizing loss to the New Orleans Pelicans. A reporter lobs Paul George a question about what went wrong, and he responds by casually admitting he's tired of his defensive assignments. In essence, he hints that playing center is uninteresting. That admission might not have caused a massive uproar if George was consistently dropping 25 to 30 points a night, or if the 76ers were sitting comfortably in a top 3 seed. But combined with his pedestrian stat lines, it came off like an excuse. Worse yet, one that threw the coaching staff under the bus. To many fans, it feels like he's more invested in off-court antics than the daily grind of making the 76ers a true force.
I don't know, man. It's people just look at the All-Star break. It's like, damn, I get time to chill. Like I get time to get a breather, get a break, get a rest. And then you throw the All-Star game in there midway, and then you watching everybody around you enjoy vacation and enjoying off time. And you like, shit, I still gotta, I gotta go hard for this game.
Which leads us naturally to his much-discussed podcast. Because if there's one narrative that's taken off among certain fans, it's that Podcast P is living up to the name in all the wrong ways. The theory goes something like this. He's too busy refining his brand behind the mic to focus on the intricacies of playing NBA basketball. On the surface, it's a tempting explanation for his slump. After all, people love attributing a star's decline to any juicy off-court distraction. But if you dig deeper, you'll see the claims don't hold much water. George typically records once a week, and it's doubtful he's editing or handling all those behind-the-scenes tasks. Plus, if you scroll through social media, you'll find he's not exactly the only player in the league running a podcast these days. So maybe that's not the core issue. Some cynics point to his Podcast P persona and say it's a symptom of the times. NBA players are diversifying, building brands, and setting up careers beyond basketball. To them, a drop in performance is almost inevitable once a star shifts focus to off-court ventures. But plenty of top athletes manage to juggle multiple commitments without letting their game fall off a cliff. So perhaps that's not the problem at all. Maybe the real culprit is that injuries and age have simply caught up to Paul George, forcing him into a role he never anticipated.
Rightfully so. There's been a lot of stars that have been injured and been hurt. And so they aren't, available every night. Myself being in that, haven't been healthy some games or needed a game to get completely healthy.
Frustration is evident in everything he does. Or maybe the contract itself is part of the issue. Once a player secures that level of financial security, the motivation to chase wins can slip, especially if the team's early season trajectory looks bleak. Even the thought of the Sixers standing a chance in a play-in scenario starts to sound far-fetched. Could George and Embiid suddenly click in a last-ditch push for a postseason miracle? Stranger things have happened, but you'd be hard-pressed to find an analyst who genuinely believes this Philadelphia squad, led by the version of Paul George we're seeing right now, could steal 4 games from any of the East's top seeds. Sure, if everyone's healthy and firing on all cylinders, maybe they squeak into a 7th or 8th seed, but even that scenario typically demands a burst of consistent, high-level play, and we haven't witnessed any evidence that George can keep that up for multiple weeks.
Here's we already had a hard time with 1 game. How are we going to have 3 games, 3 All-Star games? We had hard enough time trying to get everyone to compete at a high level playing in 1 game.
Right.
So I just don't understand how, I guess it's a shorter number to play to. So I guess that's the competition. That's the competitive part about it. It's competing to get to that. I think it's 40 or something like that. But yeah, I don't like the format.
The frustration is especially poignant because fans remember what Paul George used to be. The dynamic two-way threat that could lock down an opposing star while scoring 25 or more at will didn't disappear overnight, but he sure hasn't been around lately. Everyone ages, but this abrupt downturn has people wondering if something else is at play. Is it a lingering injury he's keeping quiet? A personal situation that's zapping his focus? Or is this the normal end-of-career fade that many veterans experience, just magnified by the massive paycheck attached to his name? Of course, fans still cling to that narrative because every time Paul George uploads a new episode, it seems to arrive on the heels of a disappointing game, fueling the conspiracy that he's simply checked out. Still, let's give credit where it's due. It's not entirely fair to blame a weekly recording session for a star's decline. The more legitimate concern might be George's attitude and the interviews he's given, whether he's questioning the coach's defensive schemes or dropping cryptic hints about wanting a different role. His public statements have done little to suggest he's ready to lock in and dominate on the hardwood. And for a guy making well over $200 million over 4 years, that can't help but feel like a massive letdown to the Sixers organization and their fan base. No wonder fans have been sharpening their pitchforks. Online comments range from downright savage to borderline comedic. Pandemic P, Pathetic P, and of course, Podcast P. Memes of George missing layups or refusing to close out on shooters circulate across social platforms, each more brutal than the last. And every time the 76ers drop another game, especially to a team like the Hornets or Magic, those nicknames resurface with even greater intensity. It doesn't help that whenever George does have a decent night, 25 points with 10 rebounds here, 22 points with efficient shooting there, it often coincides with a disappointing loss. It's almost as if the stars align against Philadelphia whenever he finds his groove, prompting people to joke that a good Paul George game is secretly a curse on this Sixers squad. That leads us to another underlying debate. Does Paul George really want to keep competing at a championship level? Or is he simply looking for a graceful, or not so graceful, exit route from the league? Some fans rate his lackluster demeanor as evidence he's fully checked out. Others point to the sporadic flashes of brilliance, nights when he clearly has gas left in the tank, and argue that he's still got a few good years in him. Maybe the trouble is more emotional or motivational than physical. Perhaps the constant injuries surrounding him, the never-ending pressure from Philadelphia's fan base, and the burden of his massive contract have all converged into a perfect storm of stress. Being an NBA player is tough enough. Being singled out as the fallen star on a team that can't seem to climb out of mediocrity might be mentally exhausting. It's easy to forget how quickly fortunes can change in professional sports. A couple of marquee wins, maybe a 35-point explosion from George in a victory over a top-seeded rival, and the narrative flips. Suddenly he's found his rhythm. The jokes about Podcast P fade, and the city starts to believe again. But until that actually happens, we're left with a swirl of speculation and frustration. Will the coaching staff switch up the offense to cater to George's strengths? Or will they keep pushing him to man positions he clearly despises? Will Embiid come back in time to salvage the season and ease the burden on George's shoulders? Will Tyrese Maxey's surge continue unabated, making George's struggles even more glaring by comparison? The only certainty is that the Sixers' clock is ticking, and in an unforgiving sports landscape, patience is rarely rewarded unless it bears fruit. For Paul George, the stakes are huge. He's fighting not only for the team's postseason hopes, but for his own legacy in the twilight of his career. The days of being judged purely by potential are long gone. Now it's about tangible results. He needs to prove that he's still capable of impactful basketball, that those bored comments were a momentary slip rather than a philosophical stance, and that his weekly podcast isn't a symbol of lost focus. In the end, it all boils down to this. Can Paul George once again become the star he was? Or is this the inevitable decline of a player who's past his prime? The answer could redefine the narrative around the 76ers season, and maybe even shift the balance of power in the East if a miraculous turnaround happens. As a viewer, you're left to decide whether Paul George's story is one of redemption waiting to happen, or a cautionary tale about the perils of complacency and massive contracts. Maybe we'll see him rise from the ashes with a renewed sense of purpose, or maybe we'll watch him fade out while Philly's hopes drift away. Paul George's journey with the Philadelphia 76ers so far has been a roller coaster of dashed hopes and heated debates, with occasional sparks that tease a comeback, but often fail to ignite a real fire. Between his massive contract, a lukewarm performance, and the swirling rumors about his focus and motivation, one has to wonder if the last chapter of his career will be defined by unfulfilled promises or a remarkable redemption arc. As the season presses on, every game feels like it could be the turning point, yet those turning points never seem to arrive. The truth is, nobody knows for sure how it will all shake out. Will he shock everyone by storming back into relevance? Or will the Sixers regret every cent of that $212 million? That tension is exactly what makes this a story worth following. So keep watching, because the next twist might be just around the corner. And whether it's triumphant or tragic, Paul George's saga is far from over.